Have you ever made a choice you thought you could control, only to watch it spiral into something that destroyed everything you loved? I never imagined that a single mistake could tear apart a 20-year marriage, push my children away, and leave me completely alone. But that's exactly what happened. One moment of weakness, one decision, set off a chain of events I couldn't stop. What followed was heartbreak, betrayal, and the desperate search for redemption. This is my story. Raw, real, and a reminder of how fragile life can be when trust is broken. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see just how far someone can go to find forgiveness, and what it really costs. The day started like any other, until it didn't. I remember hearing the door creak open behind me, the shuffle of his boots on the hardwood. My stomach sank, a weight I couldn't shake even before I turned around. The look on his face was something I'll never forget. Confusion first, then anger, and finally the kind of hurt that takes years to mend. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. His gaze shifted to the man beside me, and everything spiraled, out of control. The moment felt endless, though it was over in seconds. A storm of fists, broken furniture, and shouting filled the air. I wanted to stop it, to pull him back, but it was too late. Someone had already called the police. I watched in stunned silence as my husband, once my safe haven, was handcuffed and taken away. My lover, barely able to stand, glared at me before disappearing into the flashing lights of the ambulance. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing there's no way to undo the damage. Neighbors peeked through their windows, faces painted with judgment and pity. I felt their stares like daggers, their whispers slicing through what little dignity I had left. My world had crumbled, and it wasn't just my marriage. It was everything, Isam. I stood in the middle of the chaos. The weight of what had just happened began to settle. My family, my friends, my reputation. Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And for the first time I wondered, had I destroyed my life? Beyond repair? It's strange how, when you look back, you notice things you ignored for years. Our marriage wasn't always like this. For 20 years, we built something steady, reliable. He was my rock, kind, thoughtful, and always patient, even when life tested us. I remember the way he looked at me when we first met, as if I was the only thing in the world that mattered. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing those looks. He gave me everything. Emotional support when I needed it, shared laughter over coffee in the mornings, and respect that never faltered. But comfort turned into routine, and routine into neglect. I didn't see it at the time, but I started to take him for granted. The love was there, but I wasn't holding on to it the way I should have. Looking back, I know he tried. The late-night talks, the surprise dinners, he was fighting for us in ways I didn't appreciate. I started to drift, pulling away without realizing the damage I was doing. It wasn't that I stopped loving him, it was that I let my own doubts and frustrations drown out the good things we had. I thought I had all the time in the world to fix it. And yet, here I am, wondering if I could have stopped this before it began. If I had just leaned into him instead of pulling away, maybe everything would have turned out differently. But now, those maybes haunt me. And what came next only pushed us further apart. For years, I avoided mirrors. It wasn't about vanity. It was the quiet dissatisfaction that settled deep in my bones. I didn't feel like myself anymore. Time had left its marks, and each glance at my reflection seemed to confirm what I feared. I was fading. I buried the discomfort under a busy life, convincing myself it didn't matter, but the weight of it never really went away. Then something shifted. A casual comment from a coworker, meant to be kind, sparked a fire I didn't know I had left. I joined a gym, changed my diet, and slowly started feeling like someone worth noticing again. The transformation wasn't just physical. It was emotional. I felt alive, confident, desirable in ways I hadn't in years. But instead of healing what was broken, it revealed even deeper cracks. Even with the changes, the distance between my husband and me didn't shrink. If anything, it grew wider. He noticed the difference in me, sure, but I couldn't bring myself to share what I was going through. I wanted to feel understood, to have someone see the person I was becoming, but I didn't know how to ask him for that. And so the wall between us became a fortress. I thought this newfound confidence would fix everything, that I'd feel whole again. Instead, it left me searching for more, as if something vital was still missing. And in that search, I opened a door I should have kept closed. It began innocently, just small talk at the office with the new manager. He was charming in a way that caught me off guard, the kind of attention I hadn't felt in years. At first, I dismissed it as harmless. A compliment here, a lingering smile there. But those small moments started to mean more than they should have. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly connection. But deep down, I knew it was the beginning of something dangerous. The lines blurred faster than I expected. What started as conversations over coffee turned into late-night texts, each one pulling me further away from the life I had built. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I started craving his presence, the way he seemed to understand me without judgment. The thrill was intoxicating, and I ignored the guilt gnawing at the edges of my mind. It wasn't long before things escalated. I convinced myself it was more than just infatuation, that it was something real, something I deserved. The 6 months we spent together felt like a double life. I was completely his in those moments, but every time I came home, the coldness between my husband and me grew unbearable. I began to lash out, pushing him further away to justify what I was doing. Looking back, I wonder if I ever really wanted to be caught. Maybe I thought it would force me to choose, to finally confront the mess I was creating. But I wasn't ready for how quickly it all unraveled, or the pain I'd leave in my wake. I started to notice the way he looked at me, or rather the way he stopped looking. His eyes, once warm and full of trust, now carried a shadow I couldn't ignore. He didn't say much, but his silence spoke volumes. At first, I told myself he didn't know, that it was all in my head. But the small cracks in our routine began to grow. He came home later, his laugh was hollow, and the energy between us felt heavy, almost suffocating. I could feel his suspicion building, even though he tried to hide it. He started watching me more closely, like he was searching for answers but didn't know how to ask the questions. The guilt in me swelled, but instead of coming clean, I withdrew further. I avoided his gaze, brushed off his concerns, and pretended everything was fine. Deep down, I think he wanted me to tell him the truth, but I couldn't. The worst part was watching him change. He stopped smiling, stopped talking about his day. He'd sit on the couch, staring blankly at the TV like he was losing pieces of himself. I could see the pain I was causing, yet I didn't stop. I didn't know how to face it. I thought I could keep it all under control, that he'd never find out. But the cracks had spread too far, and the foundation we'd built was starting to crumble. And then that night, everything he'd been holding in exploded. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal, it all came rushing out in a way I wasn't prepared for. I thought I knew what guilt felt like, but I hadn't felt the full weight of it yet. Not until he caught me. That night is a blur of chaos and regret, but the aftermath is something I'll never forget. The police lights flashing outside, the sound of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My lover, bruised and barely able to stand, was whisked away by paramedics, leaving behind a trail of blood and silence. And there I stood, paralyzed in the wreckage, my husband staring at me one last time before they took him away. The fallout was immediate. The neighbors whispered behind their curtains, their pity and judgment suffocating me. My phone didn't stop buzzing, calls from family, texts from friends, all demanding answers I didn't have the strength to give. I tried to explain, to paint myself as more than just the villain, but no one wanted to hear it. The betrayal was all they saw, and I couldn't blame them. The hardest part was the kids. They wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me. The anger in their eyes cut deeper than any words ever could. My youngest asked to stay with their grandparents, and my oldest didn't even ask. They just left. I stood there in the empty house, my world shattered, wondering how I had let it get. this far. The loneliness was suffocating, but it felt deserved. And yet the weight of it all didn't hit me fully until the silence came. No family, no friends, no partner. Just me, replaying the choices that led to this moment over and over again. I told myself it couldn't get worse, but deep down, I knew better. In the days that followed, I clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I could make things right. I wrote letters, dozens of them, to my husband and my children, pouring out every ounce of regret I had. Each word felt like a desperate plea, but the silence that followed their delivery was deafening. No responses, no acknowledgement, just nothing. It was as though I had vanished from their lives completely. I tried visiting him once. Standing outside the jail, heart pounding, I rehearsed what I would say, knowing I'd probably never get it right. When they finally told him I was there, the answer came back swift and cold. He didn't want to see me. That rejection hit harder than I expected. I knew I deserved it, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. The kids were no different. Phone calls went unanswered, texts were ignored. I'd show up to family events, hoping for a sliver of connection, but they'd avoid me like a ghost they didn't want haunting them. I tried everything: apologies, explanations, promises to do better, but nothing broke through their walls. Each rejection chipped away at me, but I kept trying, driven by guilt and a longing to fix what I had broken. But as the years passed, I started to realize forgiveness might never come. My guilt turned into a constant companion, a weight I carried with me every day. And yet, I couldn't stop trying, even when every attempt seemed futile. After all, what else was there to do but hope? The guilt was unbearable when I learned what he had endured in prison. He was attacked early on, something about being labeled violent. The irony wasn't lost on me. The bruises, the broken rib, the months of recovery, each detail stung like a slap to my face. I couldn't help but wonder if his pain would have been avoided if I had made different choices. My actions didn't just destroy our marriage, they destroyed him. When he was finally released, I thought maybe I'd get a chance to explain, to ask for forgiveness face to face. But he wanted nothing to do with me. He moved in with his sister, kept to himself, and made it painfully clear I wasn't welcome in his life. I couldn't blame him. After everything he'd been through, I was the last person he needed. Every attempt to reach out was met with silence. I sent letters he likely didn't read, showed up to his sister's house just to catch a glimpse of him, but the door never opened. He looked older, thinner, like the weight of what happened had stolen pieces of him. I could see the man I once loved, but he was guarded now, a shell of the person he used to be. The hardest part was knowing I couldn't undo what had happened to him. I couldn't take back the years he'd lost or the scars he carried. All I could do was live with the knowledge that I was the one who set everything in motion. And that knowledge? It's a punishment I carry every day. At first, it felt like I'd lost my children forever. They refused to see me, refused to hear me. Even on the rare occasions they answered a text or a call, their voices were distant, cold. My youngest would say a few clipped words before hanging up, and my oldest wouldn't respond at all. The silence was unbearable. But worse was the feeling that I had become a stranger to them, a stranger they wanted nothing to do with. Over time, cracks in their walls began to form, but it was painfully slow. They'd respond to a holiday message or show up at a family gathering out of obligation. I'd cling to those tiny moments, desperate for a connection, even if it felt shallow. It was clear, though, where their loyalty lay. They stayed close to their father, their bond with him unshaken despite everything. When I saw them together, laughing, sharing moments, I couldn't help but feel the sting of exclusion. They had rebuilt something strong with him, something I had no place in. Every smile they shared, every memory they created without me, was a reminder of how far I had fallen in their eyes. And yet I couldn't stop hoping that one day they'd let me in again, even just a little. I tried to show them I was changing. I tried to apologize, to make amends, but their trust was shattered. They let me back in their lives just enough to keep things civil, but their love for me, the warmth I used to feel in their hugs and smiles, was gone. And as I watched them pull further away, I realized that some things once broken can't ever be fully repaired. It's hard to describe what it's like to wake up every day knowing the damage you've done can never truly be undone. I replay my choices like a broken record, wishing I could go back and rewrite the story. The guilt is relentless, a quiet ache that sits in the pit of my stomach. But more than the guilt, it's the regret that keeps me up at night. The regret of losing the family I once had. I've spent years trying to piece my life back together. Therapy, volunteering, self-reflection. I've done it all, hoping it might help me become someone they could forgive. But no matter how much progress I make, there's always that lingering doubt. Will they ever see the person I'm trying to be? Or am I forever defined by my mistakes? Some days it feels hopeless. I see my ex-husband moving on, my children living their lives without me fully in them, and I wonder if I should just let go. But then I remember their faces, their laughter, the life we used to share, and I know I can't give up. Even if they never forgive me, I need to keep trying, for them and for myself. I've come to accept that redemption isn't a destination. It's a journey, one I'll be on for the rest of my life. And maybe that's okay. Maybe this is what it means to truly live with the consequences of your choices. Even if I never fully repair the damage, I can at least find a way to move forward, step by step.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.